session, that is case-based group discussion. This session will be moderated by two senior faculty, and the cases will be presented by two presenters, two faculty members, and there are four participants that will be the four senior residents. The first moderator, I would like to introduce to Professor Rohit Bhatia, sir, Professor in Department of Neurology, AIIMS, New Delhi. Sir is a president of the Indian Stroke Association. He is also a technical advisory committee member for the Index TB Guidelines for Government of India. He received International Fellowship Award for the accepted paper by American Academy of Neurology at Boston 2007, and more than 200 original article publications and more than 30 book chapters. And our second moderator will be Professor Dheeraj Khurana, sir. Sir, we have gone through sir's introduction earlier. So I'll be moving on to the next faculty member. That the cases, two cases will be presented each by one faculty member, Dr. Ilavarsi, Assistant Professor of Neurology from AIIMS, New Delhi. Madam has over 36 publications, and she is also a peer reviewer in several national and international medical journals, and her area of interest being stroke, neuroimmunology, movement disorders, and clinical neurology. And the second faculty member presenting the case today will be Dr. Sucharita Rai, Assistant Professor, Department of Neurology, PGI, Chandigarh. Her area of special interest being stroke and cerebrovascular disorders, headache, and the clinical research and evidence-based medicine. There will be four participants today for this session. That is four senior residents. There will be first Dr. Pillai Kanchana. She is a sixth semester senior resident from Department of Neurology, AIIMS. Dr. Amrita Gotur, senior resident sixth semester from Department of Neurology, AIIMS, and Dr. Akash Gupta, senior resident sixth semester from Department of Neurology, AIIMS, and Dr. Sharath Elati, fifth semester senior resident from PGI, Chandigarh. I would like to over the session to the moderators, that is Professor Rohit Bhatia sir and Professor Dheeraj Khurana sir.
Yeah, Rohit, you want
to... thank you, Dr. Snigdha, for the introduction. I thank the organizers for giving us the opportunity to moderate this session. The current session is about the changing dynamics of stroke treatment as we have evolved over the last almost 5 to 7 years from time and building out to now a tissue window for treatment paradigms. And I think wake-up stroke has always remained a challenge, but these challenges have slowly being settled and are getting settled as our understanding of stroke neurology, the dynamics of tissue and imaging have improved over a period of time. So there'll be two case presentations from two of our colleagues, young neurologists, and then they will be taking up the different aspects of the management and the dilemmas and the controversies and the planning. So without wasting much time, I would invite Dr. Ila to present her case and take the discussion forward.
And I would like to thank the organizing secretaries, Anu ma'am and Vishnu sir, also Rohit sir and Dheeraj sir for moderating this session. So we'll go to our session on wake-up strokes. As Professor Padma was just briefing, over the last 2 decades, there has been a great progress in multimodal imaging modalities that has actually changed the landscape of reperfusion therapy in acute ischemic stroke. In 1995, the first NIMS trial was published regarding thrombolysis in acute ischemic stroke, and it took another 23 years for evidence to come up for managing wake-up strokes, which constitutes up to 20% of patients who present to the emergency with a possibility of a reperfusion. So over the last 3 years, we have accumulated adequate evidence from both observational studies as well as randomized controlled trials. So whenever we speak of reperfusion therapy in acute ischemic stroke, the oft repeated adage is time is brain. We used to measure time using a clock, but now with advanced imaging techniques, we use the MRI or the CT, which is called as a MRI clock, to measure whether the patient is in the time window for thrombolysis or not. So without wasting much time, let us go into the case directly and see how we use the MRI clock to thrombolyze patients actually in the bedside. So we had this 67-year-old lady who went to sleep at 12 a.m. and woke up at around 9 a.m. in the morning, and she was found to have right hemiparesis with aphasia. There was no witnessed convulsive activity, no tongue bite or injuries. She came to the emergency at 12 p.m. That is around 3 hours after being found to have these deficits. There was no history of previous strokes or transient ischemic attacks, and she was a diabetic on irregular treatment and hypertensive, for which she was taking medications regularly. There was no fever or constitutional symptoms. Baseline MRS was 0, meaning that she was perfectly normal prior to this deficit. She had no known cardiac illness. She was not on any anticoagulant or antiplatelets, and there were no recent intracranial or major surgeries or puncture of a non-compressible blood vessel. She did not have any history of GI bleed in the past 3 weeks or any history to suggest a bleeding diathesis. There was no setting to suggest an infective endocarditis or a manifest liver disease. And general examination and cardiovascular and other systemic examination was unremarkable. So once I see this patient in the emergency, the questions that I ask myself and I try to find an answer are: is it a stroke or a stroke mimic? And the first investigation that I would like to ask for is her blood sugar, which was done using a finger stick glucometer, and we found the blood sugar to be 332 milligrams per deciliter. So is she in the stroke window? So currently, based on the available evidence, any patient who was last seen normal within the last 24 hours is presumed to be in the stroke window, subject to confirmation by further imaging. What was the time of last seen normal? In this patient, it was 2 a.m., which was 7 hours prior to waking up. So what was her NIHSS? We calculated her NIHSS to be 16, which is actually a severe stroke. So the first clinical call that I would like to emphasize is that the pulse and the blood pressure should be checked in both the upper limbs, and all the 4 limb pulses should be checked, because once we are contemplating thrombolysis, there are certain patients who have aortic dissection which can present like with a stroke or a myocardial infarction, and if thrombolized, that may lead to cardiac tamponade and it could be fatal. So the next step was you check the blood pressure and make sure it is less than 185 by 110 millimeters of mercury. And if not, you may give a shot of labetalol 20 milligrams IV stat, and you are supposed to get 2 large bore IV cannulas and shift the patient urgently to the MRI suite. So we get a MRI which stroke protocol, which includes diffusion and ADC, FLAR, SWA or a GRE protocol to rule out an intracranial hemorrhage, which is an absolute contraindication for IV thrombolysis, and MR angio TOF protocol or CT angiography of the neck and the circle of Willis to look for large vessel occlusion. The second option would be to get a CT with CT angiography and a CT perfusion imaging. So in this particular patient, symptom recognition to MRI, the time window was 3 hours and 15 minutes. And as you see here, you find the area of diffusion restriction in the left posterior limb of internal capsule region here, which is hypodense on ADC. And if you look at the FLAR, there are some subtle FLAR hyperintensities, but according to the wake-up protocol, these are not significant FLAR hyperintensities. So we did not find any SWI blooming to suggest intracranial bleed, or the MR angio did not reveal any large vessel occlusion. So the questions that come to my mind is she a candidate for thrombolysis? Yes, according to the wake-up protocol, yes. What thrombolytic agent should I use? So currently we have 2 thrombolytic agents which are widely used for acute stroke thrombolysis. One is alteplase and the other is tenecteplase. But so far, all the evidence for wake-up stroke has been with the use of alteplase. Tenecteplase trials are going on. The TWIST trial, I checked yesterday on clinicaltrials.gov. The recruitment is still ongoing, and probably the results are expected by 2022. And what should I tell my patient? What is the benefit and what is the harm? So we are supposed to balance the benefit of neurologic improvement and functional independence against the risk of intracranial hemorrhage, systemic hemorrhage, neurologic deterioration, or death. So whenever we have a dilemma regarding the risks and benefits, we look at the evidence available, and of the and the RCTs are of course the gold standard to assess the efficacy and safety of any intervention. So we have 4 randomized controlled trials. The first published trial was the Wake Up trial. This came in the beginning of 2018, and it was an MRI based thrombolysis in which we look for diffusion flare mismatch, which means that there is a diffusion restricting lesion but no obvious signal change on flare. And the other 3 trials have also been published, in which the ECAS and the ECAS trial, ECAS 4 trial, it was actually a negative trial in which they used perfusion and diffusion mismatch to select patients for thrombolysis. Then we have this extend trial in which CT perfusion using rapid software was used to select patients for IV thrombolysis, and this trial by Michel et al., which also used CT perfusion to select patients. So let us see the meta-analysis of these major randomized control trials, which included up to around 862 patients. So whenever we talk of thrombolysis, we speak of excellent functional outcomes, which is defined as MRS of 0 to 1 at 90 days. So if you look carefully at the forest plot, you find that the diamond lies clearly favoring the intravenous thrombolysis group with an odds ratio of 1.48, and the confidence interval is doesn't include 1, which means that clearly thrombolysis using IV alteplase is beneficial, and it improves the proportion of patients who reach a excellent functional outcome at 3 months. Similarly, functional independence at 3 months was also significant with an odds ratio of 1.42 with the confidence interval not including 1. So let us see the risk of symptomatic intracranial hemorrhage, which is the most feared complication of intravenous thrombolysis. And as you see here, there is clearly increased risk of intracranial hemorrhhage with an odds ratio of 5.28, and it clearly shows that patients who are undergoing IV thrombolysis for wake-up stroke using CT or MRI guided protocols, they definitely have an increased risk of bleeding. So let us see the benefits and risks in the further slides. So the answer according to Wake Up protocol. So we see that these are the exact wordings that I have taken from the protocol of the trial. It says that patients who have diffusion weighted lesion but no marked parenchymal hyperintensity. So it means that the age of the infarct is less than or equal to 4.5 hours. So this is how we use MRI as a surrogate marker to know the possible time of the patient actually having the stroke. So now I say that such patients who have these diffusion flare mismatch, if thrombolyzed, they have a higher odds of getting excellent functional outcome and functional independence at 90 days. But I also told that there is a small but significant risk of symptomatic intracranial hemorrhage. So how much benefit? So if you look carefully at this trial data, we had 53% of patients in the alteplase group who had excellent functional outcome as compared to around 42% in the placebo group, and this was statistically significant. We also had stratification based on the NIHSS and the final MRS outcome. That was also significant. And then we had as the safety outcomes, death or dependency, which was MRS of 4 to 6. That was significantly different between the two groups, but that was not statistically significant. And as you see here, the risk of intracranial hemorrhage was higher in the patients who underwent thrombolysis with alteplase, which was 4% compared to 0.4%. So how does these risk and benefit translate into clinical practice? So as I told you, there is an absolute risk reduction of 11.5. So it means that 11.5% will benefit from the TPA. So let me put this differently. So it shows that according to wake up protocol, we find that if you treat 100 patients of wake up stroke fulfilling these criteria with intravenous alteplase, you will find 12 patients, 11.5 or 12 patients who attain excellent functional outcome because of the treatment. We find that there are 42 patients who attain MRS 0 to 1, irrespective of whether they were thrombolized or not. And you also find that there are 47 patients who did not improve even after thrombolysis, and you have 2 patients who developed symptomatic intracranial hemorrhage due to the thrombolysis. So one might argue that randomized control trials are not ideal world situations. They are patients who are very carefully selected. They are very select group of patients which may not be the results of which may not be actually translatable into clinical practice. But we also know that observational studies usually have a pragmatic inclusion criteria, and there is also a meta-analysis of observational studies which was published at the beginning of this year. And we also find here that even in the pragmatic clinical situations, the odds of attaining an excellent functional outcome of MRS 0 to 1 is 1.76 in patients those who are thrombolyzed with alteplase using various CT and MRI based criteria as compared to those who were not thrombolyzed. So coming to the next question, what is flare negative versus subtle flare? So as I showed you, our patient had subtle flare hyperintensities, and there was this retrospective non-randomized study. As you see in this patient, you have a diffusion restricting lesion here, but the flare is absolutely normal. And you have this second patient in which there is mild flare hyperintensities here as corresponding to the area of diffusion restriction, and here there is clear-cut hyperintensity in both the diffusion as well as flare. So this was a propensity matched retrospective non-randomized study in which it was found that patients who underwent thrombolysis with alteplase as compared to those who were not thrombolized, they had more than 4 points improvement in NIHSS in significantly more number of patients. However, the MRS at 90 days did not significantly differ between the patients who were thrombolized and those who were not thrombolized. But it is also important to note that there was no significant difference in the intracranial hemorrhage between these patients who were thrombolized and those who weren't thrombolized. So, so far we were discussing about patients who undergo state-of-the-art MRI or CT perfusion with stroke protocols. So what do we do in settings where MRI or CT perfusion is not available? So we had this TRUST CT study, which was also a retrospective non-randomized study in which patients who had wake-up stroke with measurable deficit of NIHSS of 4 or more, and they had undergone only a non-contrast CT scan. And they included patients who had aspects more than or equal to 7. They had 2 cohorts, one of whom were thrombolyzed and the other who weren't. And it was found that there was no significant difference in patients developing symptomatic intracranial hemorrhage according to ECAS-3 definition. But as you see, more patients had more than 4 points change in NIHSS in patients who were thrombolyzed as compared to those who did not, those who weren't thrombolyzed. Significantly more, there were significantly higher odds of patients attaining excellent functional outcome of MRS 0 to 1 at 90 days also. So what happened to our patient? Our patient, unfortunately, at 24 hours post thrombolysis, this was a routine CT done at 24 hours. The patient was not symptomatic. There was no deterioration in sensorium, and this was there was a hemorrhage parenchymal hematoma 2, But according to sixth most definition, this is not SICH because the patient did not have 4 or more points rise in NIH score. So this was most likely the exact location in which the infarct was there. The hematoma is also in the same area, so probably the patient did not develop new symptoms. So the take-home points for with today's case is stroke neurology has become a hot seat. With the MRI clock, more strokes are now treatable. IV thrombolysis leads to excellent neurological outcomes in more than half of the patients. Time-based thrombolysis has been superseded by advanced neuroimaging-based protocols, and patient selection using various multimodal CT or MRI diffusion perfusion weighting images leads to better outcomes with lower risk of symptomatic intracranial hemorrhage. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ela, for the case presentation. I would also request if you have some interactive points with the students, because they're the ones who we want to see whether they are able to, they have the same perspective about management or understanding of the wake-up stroke. So do you have any specific discussion points or interaction you want to have with the students who are part of this current ongoing this session?
Or maybe the student who handled this case could give us what he thought at that time. How did he reach his decision, he or her? Do you have the student here?
I was the person who was.
Okay. So did you go through all this data? Did you go through all this data at the time before talking to the patient?
No, actually, Ela, you're supposed to ask the residents
Yes, ma'am.
and ask that opinion and then give your perspective. Like, it's an interactive session. So, you had very good points, like, what do you do? What is this? And you'd ask them, take their input and then give your expert thing. That's how you go about, instead of a didactic lecture.
Okay,
The format here is an interaction.
Yes, ma'am.
And now you involve them now. Now you start talking to them.
Yeah. So my first question is, if such a patient comes to the emergency, what is the first imaging that you do practically? I think Kanchana.
Good evening, teachers. Yes, the first imaging that we do is a plain CT brain, and along with the CT angiography.
So at this point, I have a slightly different opinion. I think if you strongly suspect a stroke, as in this patient, who had a sudden onset deficit, which did not have any other obvious explanation other than being vascular, and we feel that this patient is a potential candidate for thrombolysis, I feel instead of wasting some 15-20 minutes in organizing a CT, if it is possible, it is better to go ahead and get a MRI done first. I think I would like to put this question to Rohit sir and Dheeraj sir also.
Yeah, Dheeraj, please continue.
So if the MRI, which is sometimes not available at night or early in the morning, because in our I don't know how it works at AIIMS, but most of the MRs, they have a resting period and they close down unless you have two MRs. So since some years we've had two MRs now working. So getting an MR done maybe early in the morning, sometimes it's easy, but a lot of times it's not possible. So in that case, even if you have a CT scan and you get an angiogram done at that time, I would look at these two things and look at the aspect at that time. I know the aspects is not very strongly a correlate of the diffusion mismatch, but it may give you an indicator how the patient is doing and maybe the time period that you are within. And I believe that there are some studies just based upon which are still ongoing, looking only at the CT for even such kind of unknown onset patients. And that may be an option. If you get a CT angio along with it, maybe the decisions could be made even with the CT scan. What do you think, Rohit?
I would like to put it in two different perspectives. I think what we are discussing and what Ela has talked about is an IV thrombolysis paradigm. And we have moved to two different paradigms in wake-up strokes. One for a more pragmatic and a more larger benefit, the IV TPA trials, and for a selective benefit, the endovascular trials.
Yeah.
So if you pragmatically are seeing a patient with a moderate to high NIHS stroke scale in the time that we don't know the real time of onset, in today's world where EVT is available in centers like yours and AIMS and other centers, people would definitely go ahead with a CT, CTA, CTP protocol, because if you have a large vessel occlusion and you are, say, roughly about 12 hours from the last seen normal paradigm, and most of the strokes we know would happen closer to the onset of the stroke, and that's the unfortunate part to really know when they exactly happen. It's a time-driven thing. In that scenario, if you have a large vessel occlusion and your CTP shows a good, it is showing a morphology which is conducive that the patient will benefit with a good mismatch, you would obviously take this patient up for an endovascular thrombectomy. Now, let's say you don't find a large vessel occlusion and you've done a CT scan. At that moment, you are concerned whether you would want to go ahead with an IV TPA, and no one is going to give IV TPA till you have you are defining the protocols based on the two trials. The two trials use different imaging paradigms, and in fact, the extent is based on an MR perfusion paradigm, and the wake up is based on a diffusion flare mismatch paradigm. So if you are in a center which gives you an MR 24/7, you think you should still go ahead with, let's say the scans, the CTs looks relatively great, and you have a great aspects, and you want to be very sure this is not a guy who's really close to the wake up time, you would, of course, as Ela said, take up for an MR immediately and do a diffusion mismatch. And if you have a flare diffusion mismatch and you are very certain that, yeah, you want to go ahead with a TPA paradigm, you would go with a TPA. But to say that for, and if you want to use an MR perfusion paradigm, in the same principle that you would use a paradigm which is based on a CT perfusion, then you straight away take to a MR perfusion paradigm, because you will do an MR, you will do a perfusion, and you will do an MR angio as well. So I guess that all depends whether you are comfortable to go ahead with thrombolysis with the available evidence which has been garnered by these two big trials. Unfortunately, the extent is a negative trial and wake up is a positive trial. But if you put this all into a meta-analysis, there is a suggestion that you benefit. And they also have a meta-analysis published this year in JAMA and last year by Bruce Campbell's group, where they've looked at the perfusion-based imaging between 4.5 to 9 hours, and that was just based on extent and the epithet trials. So I guess we are learning and we are moving towards extended time window thrombolysis, but I'm not certain whether this is still deliverable in practice very routinely, until unless you have a wake up stroke and you believe in going ahead with diffusion flare mismatch. So I think, as Dheeraj, you have said, and as Eli said, it will depend on the scenario that you work in. If you are in a scenario where MR is available, you can sort out these issues immediately, and you will also know whether the patient is an EVT candidate, if the patient is not an EVT candidate. But where it is not available, I think CT, CTA is a good way to go. And if you have a large vessel occlusion and you have a thrombectomy, you have a thrombectomy capability, then you do a perfusion and you straight away take up for thrombectomy. I think that's my take on it.
Yeah, just to add on, Rohit, even I think the extend trial that also used a CTP to decide upon its the selection of patients. Apart from MR, it had the options of both CTP and MR.
Yes.
And although the trials, the results were not robust, but I think we are moving and towards, since rapid is being so rampantly being used, and that may in fact be one of the paradigms or AI tools which comes into practice very routinely with all centers. It's coming to PJ very soon, what I hear. And it may indicate a salvageable tissue even on CT if we use the rapid software, because it has the automated thresholds already fed into the rapid. And we currently, if you're using a manual non-automated CTP, it has some drawbacks the way we've been doing it in our institutes. So that's what I actually wanted to indicate, that maybe if MR it's always a problem. If of course it's there, it's ideal. Maybe with coming time, CTP may give us more valid data, even in the absence of a occlusion, if we're not looking at the occlusion for a wake up.
So the next question I would like to ask some resident. is what will they do if the patient is on oral anticoagulation and the patient was not taking the drug very regularly and has a wake-up stroke with no large vessel occlusion.
Probably, Leela, we can take up
You're
the.
talking of a NOAC. You want a you refer a NOAC or simple warfarin?
First, I would like to go with warfarin.
Warfarin.
Irregular.
That's simple. I think ask them about a NOAC.
Neeraj, maybe we can take this case in the end. I mean, take this question along with the others because
Yeah. We could do that because the other case may
Yeah.
have something relevant to this.
we can take them together during the interaction session.
Yeah.
So I think Neeraj, you can please invite
Yeah, sure.
the next speaker.
Can I have the slide?
They were already introduced by the slide. You can just give a.
Okay. So next case is going to be the next talk or the case is going to be delivered by Sucharita, Dr. Sucharita Ray, who's my colleague here in the of neurology. And this is an interesting case again in regards to the wake-up paradigm, as well as has some additional intriguing features, which we will see as the case proceeds. Sucharita.
Thank you, sir. I have to pay my thanks to the course directors, Dr. Lal, Dr. Padma, who have been my teachers and are still teaching me on this way to learn every day. And it's been a learning experience, especially today, when I'm amongst the people that I was there in the past and amongst my new friends and new environment in Chandigarh. I have to also thank the organizers, Dr. Vishnu and Dr. Anu Gupta, for wonderfully putting out this interaction session so that we can get to know a lot of neurology in this testing times. And finally, my respected teachers, Dr. Bhatia, Dr. Dheeraj, who have literally held my hands and taught me stroke, or whatever I know of it till now. So this is a very simple and straightforward case, but with a small twist. I'll keep it short. I'll keep it very simple. And I would like all these residents to kindly chip in with their thoughts. So this describes a 49-year-old female who's a hypertensive for last 10 years and was on regular treatment with amlodipine. So 2 days prior to the onset, which was in 10th of November 2019, she had some right upper limb paresthesia for 2 minutes, but there were no other deficits and she continued to be okay and never got any investigations for the same. The next day, there was a family function. She attended the entire day completely actively without any issues, went to sleep wrecked at 1 a.m. in the morning and woke up at 4:30 a.m. So 3.5 hours. So when she woke up, she was found to have right-sided hemiparesis along with inability to speak any commands by her family members. So 1 o'clock last seen normal, woke up at 4:30 seen by her attendants with right hemiparesis, confusion and inability to speak. She was brought to emergency at 5.5 hours from last seen normal. Now here comes the twist. 4 months prior to this episode, she noticed gradually progressive painless abdominal distension. And then there was a massive ascites over a period of maybe 15-20 days. 8 liters of ascitic fluid were tapped and it was found to have positive cells, malignant cytology for metastatic adenocarcinoma of the ovary. And immediately she was started on chemotherapy, carboplatin and paclitaxel. And she had one episode of self-limiting melena during this time of chemotherapy. Again, she didn't get any investigations for the same. There were no other episodes of either bleeding or thrombosis elsewhere. 1.5 years postmenopausal, and the last known CA125, which is a marker for adenocarcinoma of the ovary, was 72, the upper limit of normal being 35. Basically, she had finished her cycles for chemo, but she was planned for reassessment to determine the status of her malignancy and further treatment. So this is for the residents. I have given 4 options. All of you, please chip in and tell me what would your next step be.
Exactly.
Is there any
or maybe we could reframe what would your thoughts be when you see such a patient?
Yeah, what would your thoughts be for this? I have given 4 options. You agree with any of them and or any other or more than one, please chip in.
I request all the residents to please put on their video. And
yeah, at least we can know who's awake and who's not there.
Sharath, you can start by the time others join in.
Yes, ma'am. I would like to counsel the patient for conservative management because the life expectancy in this case in a metastatic disease would be not more than 6 months. So I would counsel for a conservative management.
That's fatalistic of you coming from TI. But yeah, 49-year-old with,
So you don't want to give 6 months of good quality of life to a patient who has 6 months left, even because of the malignancy. If she's left with a high deficit, she's going to have a worse. So quality, why would you think of doing that? Think from the patient's perspective.
Family is completely affording, they want the stroke to be treated. Very, very.
If we were to consider that the thrombolysis is going to be very effective in, if there's an artery which is very amenable to opening up. First of all, why did you think of this? That's why I wanted to know the thoughts. You said malignancy, so what thoughts come to you in relation to thrombolysis, apart from offering or not offering?
Sir, there is a chance of CNS metastatic disease, and also the risk of recently patient had history of melanoma. Although the duration of melanoma is around 4 weeks prior, not 21 days.
No.
Is melanoma a contraindication in the listed contraindications of thrombolysis? You see so many nodes. It's like an echo coming from everywhere. Right, so that's not a contraindication, firstly. And apart from that, what else do you think? One thought would come as it's a hypercoagulable state.
Yes.
Would you not give credence to the fact that the patient had a TIA a few days back? And would you still think it to be linked to a factor which is malignancy related or atherosclerosis or her vascular risk factor related? Would that enter into your decision making?
Yes, sir. I would definitely consider atherosclerosis disease in this patient because she had.
So if you had a TIA, you had it again, and what is there? How does a metastasis related cancer differ from an atherosclerotic or an embolic athero or cardioembolic stroke differ in their manifestation? These are the two things I would think of at that time to take a decision on thrombolizing. Not just it's too, I would say, abridged to say, oh, you have metastasis, you're not going to live 6 months, so let's go home, go home, forget about it. That would be too short-sighted, and I would say abridged.
So, Saad, are your concerns not to treat her were based on your concerns about treatment-related adverse events or treatment-related concerns, or you were mainly your main concern is that why should we be aggressive if we have, a lesser life expectancy? Just give your perspective, though we go to the next people and what they think.
ये दो questions को अगर तुम सोचो तो फिर you can take a recall on that.
You are thinking it is probably not a stroke, sir. If I got him right, he's probably thinking it's metastasis.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to trigger is.
That you can't say because you've not investigated.
And TIA हुआ है उससे कुछ पता लगता है कि हो सकता है it's not a malignancy related thing. It may just be actually a vascular stroke.
Dr. Akash, Dr. Amrita, Kanchana.
I would, good evening, respected teachers. I'm Dr. Amrita. I would plan a hyperacute stroke management protocol in this patient based on the fact that though there is a background of malignancy, the fact that the patient has had a TIA is suggesting that there could possibly be disease of the large vessels, and even otherwise, since the patient has presented in the window which is currently 24 hours for an acute ischemic stroke, I would at least image the patient and look at the vascular imaging and thereby decide what is the best management for the patient.
Prakash?
Sir, I would also go ahead with hyperacute stroke management protocol as the patient has a metastasis of a cancer-like state, which is known to be a prothrombotic state. Moreover, she had a history of TIA, so a possibility of stroke would be there, but a possibility of metastasis would also be there. So I would first go with the
so what do you think would be the chances of a metastasis? See, the the thinking of a metastasis is very right because of the risk of hemorrhage with metastatic disease. So what do you think, going this scenario, where would you lay your
It would be on
bets
second
on?
as compared to atherosclerotic disease as compared to, I would keep first as atherosclerotic disease as first possibility, and second would be a metastasis, being a history of abdominal peritoneal mets also being present.
And you also said something like a prothrombotic state.
Yes.
If the presence of a prothrombotic state gives you further additional thoughts on thrombolysis, is it going to offer a very good chance of lysing the clot, or does that also does
So
that
we
come
will
into your
take it
mind?
further, sir, maybe in the discussions.
Sure.
It's there in the slides, sir. So like the residents all said, so the clinical findings for the patient was that she had right hemiparesis with and facial palsy and global aphasia. The total NIHS on initial evaluation was 19. And so many of our residents said, apart from the 2am diagnosis in winter, the patient was immediately wheeled into the CT suite, and the door to imaging time that we have in PGI is very good, within 20 minutes. And we got a dense MCA, we got an aspects of 7/10, and the angiogram showed an occlusion of the proximal M2 MCA. Remember, she is 5.5 hours from the onset. So these are the images in CT. You can see there is obscuration of the insular area in the posterior limb of the internal capsule, and in the M1, along with actually bilateral dense MCA was there, but it's there on the affected side also. And on angio, so the patient was immediately consenting for all procedures, and the hyperacute stroke protocol was instituted. She immediately underwent mechanical thrombectomy. So there was complete recanalization of the M2 MCA, which was blocked, but there was a resultant persistent blockage of the superior division of MCA, which was still not being able to be recanalized. Otherwise, uneventful procedure, shifted out with an NIHS of 10, and 2,500 units of heparin were given. So these are the pre and post DSA images. So you can see that there is this complete occlusion of proximal M2 MCA on the left. And after recanalization, there is good flow to the distal MCA, especially the inferior division, but the superior division remains blocked. You can see the lenticular striate vessels also. So the NIHS is improved and the patient came back. So that's when she was in the ward. We got her investigated for most of the other things that that all of you people have pointed out. So there was the positive findings that were significant in this particular patient. She had some amount of leukopenia, 4,300, and she had thrombocytopenia, not thrombocytopenia, but platelets were reduced at 1,32,000. All the prothrombotic factors were worked up in detail. So the important ones were that the ones that we were considering, D-dimer, FDP turned out to be normal, and the troponin was negative. She had 2+ reticular cytoplasmic pattern ANA positivity, but the marker for ovarian malignancy, the report which we got was 70 odd. Initially, which was 2,145, had reduced to 6.1. So I think for Sharath, it says that, even if the patient, gives you a high suspicion for probable metastasis, and also when treatment has been accorded to the patient, the benefit of doubt for going ahead with the therapeutic procedure should always outweigh a nihilistic attempt at, doing a conservative management. So, we have some issues that need to be addressed here. Basically, the patient was a very clear-cut case with stroke had it not been for the ovarian malignancy. Somebody presenting with a large vessel occlusion at 5.5 hours, and no other obvious contraindications apart from this particular caveat. But all these points that we discussed just right now, what were the mechanisms which underlie the cancer? How do they present? And if there are any imaging characteristics that would help you think for these possible etiologies. And then finally, if the hyperacute stroke management protocol is different in patients with cancer, what are the indications, contraindications for the hyperacute protocols, and similar other issues which we shall be taking up. So the first thing, what are the mechanisms of stroke in malignancy? So we all know that, these are the prothrombotic factors which are secreted, which lead to a state of hypercoagulability, which is now even now being told that probably stroke is a paraneoplastic presentation of that of malignancy. And there are so many types of cancers which can present with stroke. We shall be coming to it later. But it is also important to know that there are many other causes which can be important. One important thing that you need to keep in mind is the presence of active chemotherapy, radiotherapy, or even hormonal therapy which has been given to the patient, which can cause, again, hormonal changes and lead to a hypercoagulable effect, which can lead to polycythemia, which can cause hypercoagulability. And obviously, we have the large artery atherosclerosis and other undetermined causes. So many of the patient reports which we have for presentation of stroke in cancer-associated patients have occult cryptogenic causes. And then we can also have patients coming to you with stroke with metastasis like we discussed, and even tumor emboli can be present, or it may just invade into the CNS and even cause mechanical compression in case of a primary intraaxial neoplasm or in case of a metastatic disease. So, so basically there are some differences for these patients with stroke having a malignancy associated as compared to patients who have a stroke due to a conventional mechanism. And it is important to know. So it's important to know that whenever these patients come to you, any number of strokes has mostly been found out in several prospective cohort studies, long-term population studies, which have been published in 2016 and even one recently in 2019, that any time 15% of patients with stroke may have some concomitant occult cancer with them, and a higher percentage of ischemia on average. It's not 85-15 that we find in a conventional risk factor. You have a very skewed representation of ischemia and hemorrhage which can be present in them. And as always, it is understandable they have much higher morbidity and mortality than the non-cancer counterparts. They usually have younger age, they are usually more moribund, less favorable nutritional status, and they have more severe strokes. And a lot of them present with cryptogenic strokes. In fact, whenever you compare it with this non-cancer group, for this matched cohort, we always found out that the risk for developing any stroke, ischemic or hemorrhagic was much higher as compared to the normal population, and death was also significantly higher. So when do you suspect stroke which might have occult malignancy? You need to look for telltale signs. So like I said, you need to have all these signs. The patient is more moribund, has a severe stroke, but you also need to have some imaging evidence also and some other peripheral lab markers. Important among the imaging will come to later, but one very important thing is when you see higher levels of D-dimer, CRP and FDP. We don't do them when the patient runs into the emergency, but we might get the history of a previous coagulopathy. Very strong indicator for an occult malignancy is the presence of a history of DVT, pulmonary embolism, either presenting before the stroke or during the patient is presenting with stroke. So these are one of the most important indicators of something else occurring along with the main thing that is bringing him to the neurological emergency. And when you look at when you look at the imaging, it will give you a large number of other information also. And anemia is another important, very important feature to find out that these patients also have some occult malignancy, especially if they come more commonly in the elderly. Some retrospective studies have said it is mostly lung cancer that present with strokes, but the whole contribution from lung cancer could be because, as it is, we know that lung cancer predominates. It's one of the most commonest causes of cancer. But remember that solid cancers, hematological cancers, genetic urinary cancers, other metastatic malignancies and lung cancer can all present with strokes. So it's important to know also that if any cancer has a predilection for a certain type of stroke. So this is a list which you can always take the slides later, that you have some kinds of stroke. It's not an absolute rule or a dictum that they always present like this, but you have some like myeloma, choriocarcinoma, liver and renal cell carcinoma, which are more lytic cancers, that they are more prone towards presenting a hemorrhagic stroke, whereas lungs, most solid cancers mostly, they present with an ischemic phenotype. And there are so many others like a melanoma of the skin or a non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, which can present both an ischemic and a hemorrhagic component. So imaging is very important. What patterns of stroke will give you the clue to suggest occult malignancy? Can any of you say if you know any pattern that will make you suspect that there is probably something else happening? Akash, Dr. Amrita, Dr. Kanchana, Dr. Sharath. Quick.
A watershed infarcts can give.
No, watershed don't suggest you that. They suggest definitely an IC involvement or you systemic hypoperfusion. Not specifically anything else, any pattern.
As we said, if there is not a defined usual, classic toast-based risk factor pattern, then, and you're thinking about a cancer-associated pattern, then what comes to your mind should be the pattern on imaging, because it won't really define territories as such. It could define, but it may not. So, do you have any specific thoughts in your mind on this?
An embolic pattern without any previous known heart condition.
Embolic is one of them. Anything else?
No, more diffuse pattern involving both the sides.
Yes, so diffuse pattern both sides. But is it always the case? Can you have a single stroke also, which can occur in a case with malignancy?
Yes, ma'am.
Single large vessel involvement, nothing else.
Yes,
Like in our patient.
yes, ma'am.
You just saw there was one large vessel involvement and she had no other microembolic scattering elsewhere. It is one region confined to that. You can also have these presentations. Right, so see, you have this paper which was published way back in 2012 in European Neurology. So diffusion-weighted lesion patterns in cancer-associated strokes have been told. Remember this first two lines. Single stroke, so you know you have this pulse regularly, regular and all that thing. So it's basically that 2x2 combination. Single, multiple stroke, single, multiple vascular territory. So either single or multiple stroke in single or multiple vascular territory, like Bhatia sir said. And also same thing can be associated with or without microembolic scattering. Now they have been given this pattern of, you know, single acute lesion, multiple acute lesion in one territory with microembolic scattering, multiple acute lesions in more than one territory with or without microembolic scattering in one side or opposite side. So whenever you have all these patterns, so basically remember, does not follow the tenets of vascular territory distribution, does not follow the tenets of hemispheric spreading. It's all, it can be in any matter, any way it can present to you. Just think of, keep something else in mind, because this can give you a clue to some occult malignancy present in this patient. So, like, you know, Dr. Ela has gone ahead with the first case. The workflow of the patient in patients with stroke with cancer follows more or less the same guidelines as that of treating any patient having coming to you with a wake-up stroke. So, when we talk about these patients with a current malignancy, we need to know that we have certain guidelines in place, but the individual decision has to be taken accordingly after considering everything together. So basically, there is no contraindication to IV alteplase, but we do not have large-scale studies. But remember that, like we discussed in the very first scenario, that if we have a reasonable life expectancy, then the benefit from IV alteplase can be given. And again, the one thing that you need to remember in this case is that there should not be the presence of an intraaxial neoplasm, or there should not be any hemorrhagic component. So these two will be the absolute contraindication.
Sarita, if I interrupt you for
sure, sir.
Interaction, is that what do you think, Dr. Sarath, if this patient came at 2 hours to your ER and you found the same scan and you found an occlusion, would you go for bridging or you would go for direct MT? What are your concerns?
So I'll go for bridging only, sir.
Okay, so what would you then, in that scenario, explain the family? She has an underlying malignancy, so she's potentially at a higher risk of maybe a bleeding tendency. We don't know. I mean, there are different cancers with different, I mean, the data for cancer-associated thrombolysis is heterogeneous and it varies from the site and the location of the cancer itself. And they may also question you that she had a recent melena, which was a very transient thing. We don't really know why it was. And you don't have that time her, correlates of her hematological status actively. When do you want to waste time doing all that, apart from a rapid INR? So would you explain them a higher risk? Would you explain them the same risk as seen? And if the family is a bit concerned, would you take for direct MT in a setting if you are having an MT available? But the residents can pitch in as well.
Sir, I will explain what a high risk.
Another, Sarath, just before you answer, just to add on to what Rohit just told you, just this fact about 6 months, I just need to just make a reference to this. I understand that you were probably sticking to the guideline by saying that if you had less than 6 months, but that's where I just want to interject. When you have expected malignancy of more than or less than 6 months, it's not possible for you to predict in a patient who's come with a malignancy. Here it possibly mentions moribund patients of cancer. When we've seen those, we've actually denied them. Patients who are bedridden with cancer, who have severe disability, and where things are quite obvious that patient may not have a long half-life, or sorry, a long lifespan. That's where we could possibly tell them that there is no use of thrombolysis. But in a patient who's been otherwise stable, walking, and to calculate the lifespan is not an easy job. It may be 6 months plus minus 3 months. So that needs to be seen as a first thing on the patient before you just simply decide it's less than 6 months. It's a very easy answer to give, but has a lot of implications. Yeah, go ahead.
Sir, I would like to ask Bhate sir, what is your take on whether we should go ahead with bridging or whether we should go for directly either thrombolysis or mechanical?
So, Sucharita, the scenario in patients with cancer is a bit uncertain. And if there is a suggestion that she had some active recent bleeding and that's not at a site which is compressible and there may be a potential risk that she may bleed more, and I have availability of an MT team which is quick and good, I may go ahead with a direct MT in a scenario with a proximal M2 occlusion. The scenario may have been different. It was a distal M2. I may have to go for IVTPA first, followed by a mechanical thrombectomy, if reasonably possible.
Yes,
but
sir.
I agree that that decision may be different when I'm in that situation and I have to make a quick decision, and family is willing to accept the risk benefit, potential risk benefit, then I may still go ahead with bridging as well. But if there is a concern of the family that they are concerned that they don't want to increase the risk of a bleeding, and we have facilities for MT, we may consider direct MT as well. Dheeraj, what's your take on that?
I would, match some of those things, but I would look at some of the findings of a patient. For example, if this patient who came up with a large to a medium vessel occlusion and the CT angio of the neck was normal, I would not deny the patient bridging. Definitely bridging would be done, considering the fact that maybe this thrombotic or ESUS, and if those clots are very highly amenable to thrombolysis. If there is absence of thrombolysis, would in fact help me take a decision towards bridging. But if atherosclerotic disease was there, I would have thought of, yeah, definitely maybe we err towards avoiding the bridging and taking to direct MT.
Okay, so the CT
residents, any concerns? What would you do in that scenario? Amrita, what would be your decision?
So I would go for bridging, but I would definitely counsel the relatives about the risk benefit ratio, because considering the background of malignancy and history of Malina, I would tell them that there is a possibility the possibility of bleed. I will definitely explain, and only having explained to them the risk benefit, I would go in for bridging and then take up the patient.
Unfortunate part about malignancy and thrombolysis is that it comes from small different malignancy experiences, clinical experiences, and the safety and the efficacy is not very well delineated. I guess it remains individualized. We have some data for lung cancers that there is no much bleeding after TPA, and there may be also possible, but if let's say there is a bleeding intra, let's say a malignancy in the colon, which has a potential risk of increased bleeding because it's highly vascular, then you may end up making a patient more sicker. So I think it becomes a very relative decision at that moment. And right now it is all retrospective, so we can actually make a tough decision or a good decision. But when you're actually in the system, most of us may end up quickly doing bridging because we don't want to lose time to benefit. Because if the MT fails, then you may feel that, okay, you may have done some benefit as well, with at least a 20% chance that her M2 proximal would have lysed, that's the main concern. So Sucharita, you can go ahead and then give your final decision on that.
So just some important things for the residents. So it's very important also to know that clot characteristics also
just
matter
before
a
you
lot.
proceed, Sucharita,
Yes,
just
sir.
one question I had in my mind. Did the presence of a TIA, is there data on that? Would that favor towards a mechanism?
Sir,
Where in this
majority
case
of them
was
have been told to be embolic, but in this patient, there was neck imaging done. There was no evidence of.
No, in general, when we're considering a malignancy associated, would TIA figure into our importance that this may be malignancy related or not? Not for this case, just for everyone to.
So maybe it would just suggest maybe an emboli, but then again, whether that emboli is coming from an atherosclerotic or coming from a tumor emboli would be very hard to detect. We have some case reports where they have presented multiple TIAs leading on to strokes, and they have found out PFOs in the patients. But I don't know large scale data.
That's fine.
Okay. A potential paralytic endocarditis as well. We don't know.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Sucharita, you will have to probably come to your
last slide
points, and because we actually beyond schedule.
Right. So just wanted to tell about this important thing for the residents, that clot characteristics are very vital. Remember that, it's also depending upon the ratio of the fibrin to the RBC, which will determine how far the clot is able to lyse. So that's also another complication that adds up. Remember that any clot which has got more RBCs in it is more amenable not just to recanalization by thrombolysis, but also to come over, be retrieved with the help of a stent aspirator. And then again, like we have discussed, it's all mostly retrospective case reports and series which have been helpful to give us some information. And remember that endovascular therapy, like we have discussed in this particular patient, has been done in limited series, and it has been shown to have good amount of free perfusion rate and favorable outcome when it is compared to thrombolysis. So remember that overall thrombolysis versus thrombolysis with endovascular has almost got a comparable result, but these are always very small populations of cancer associated versus non-cancer studies. And it's not just the acute treatment also, but for whatever patients we have, it's also important to know the subsequent line of management that will differ from patient to patient. So management of the primary cancer is important in the hyperacute stage of the stroke, but the cancer predominates your management once the hyperacute stage is over. So these are certain things that you need to know. And finally, important to know that you should learn to suspect and diagnose cancer-associated strokes, and remember that every cancer-associated stroke may be, but is not necessarily always metastasis. Customize your hyperacute stroke protocol for the patient. Remember that clot characteristics determines the rate of recanalization, and always the cancer-associated patients need more intensive monitoring and management due to higher chances of morbidity and mortality. Thank you.
How had the patient done? How did this patient do?
Actually in remission, she was okay for the next 8 months, after which she had a relapse. So the latest update, she has not responded to our calls. She was planned for a
theory is also
6 months
negated.
into that. There was no recurrence of stroke, sir. She was
the 6-month theory is negated. She lived for 8 months at least.
All right.
Dheeraj, could you just give the final just take home points, and we session?
Okay, fine. I think we're short of time. So the important part is with the expanding indications for thrombolysis. This is many years back, we didn't have enough data. Flare diffusion mismatch was known to be the only thing that we probably had, but with increasing information, increasing data and registry data, there is a registry data coming up too, which tells us that treating wake-up strokes is not only beneficial, it's worth the effort, because you're going to save a life from disability, which otherwise would have gone on to severe disability. And case by case, take a call. MR is preferred, of course, but I think these are two interesting cases which gave us a lot of insight. And Rohit, you want to add on something?
Oh, thank you, Dheeraj. And I think two wonderful cases. Thank you, students, for interacting. And we would have been, if for the lack of time, because the next session is also pretty interesting and a good debate. So I think we move on to the next session. And thank you, organizers. Thank you, Dheeraj. Thank you, Sucharita, Ela, and all these residents who joined in the discussion.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Dheeraj, sir. Thank you, all the residents.